There's been a flurry of inter-Korea meetings on the Olympics since last week, and today the two Koreas are meeting for the third time in less than 10 days to continue their discussions on the North's participation in the PyeongChang Winter Games next month, days ahead of talks with the International Olympic Committee on the matter. Now, numerous issues are on the table today, but let's get started by listening to what the two sides had to say as they began their meeting.
It's good to meet again after our first meeting last week. And like you just said, after our meeting on January 9th, working-level talks were also held on sending North Korea's art troupe to the PyeongChang Winter Olympics. And these talks ended well. We hope the North's participation in the PyeongChang Winter Olympics and Paralympics will foster an Olympics of peace and hopefully be a chance to improve inter-Korean relations by bringing peace to the Korean Peninsula.
It's been a week since our last meeting. It's a pleasure to meet you again. It feels like we're back to June 15, 2000, when the North-South Joint Declaration was adopted. Ties between the North and South, in reality, have been frozen, and we're in a state of confrontation since 2008. I believe it is the Korean people's will that relations return to normality.
And to tell us more about today's Vice Minister level meeting, we're now joined by Professor Kim Hyun-uk from the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
All right, so what are some of the things that have been discussed at today's meeting, and what are some of the things that have been agreed on in regards to the North's participation in the PyeongChang Winter Games?
The official announcement has been made yet, so I'm not sure what's going to be the result, but I think I can guess some of the important logistic issues about the PyeongChang Winter Olympic Games. For example, whether two Koreas would enter into the opening ceremony together, what will be the entire scale and size of North Korean delegates into South Korea, how they're going to move into South Korea, whether by land or by sea. All that kind of things I think would have been discussed. And also, I don't want to exclude the possibility that they might have been touched upon some of other issues irrelevant to the PyeongChang Olympic Games. Maybe they might have some momentum to upgrade or develop North-South Korea relations rather than only focusing on the Winter Olympic Games.
Now, what about the cost involved in bringing the North Korean delegation to the Games? I mean, because supporting the regime directly with cash would violate the framework of UN Security Council sanctions as well as international sanctions on the North.
Yes, you're right. You know, South Korean government and IOC all expressed their willingness to pay for the accommodations for North Korean delegates, but also there's some concerns that those support would not have to violate the UN sanctions, which means that these propositions should not be made by cash. And also the US government also made it clear that any proposition of goods to North Korean delegates should not be allowed, so that they would bring them to North Korea and resell it. So all that kind of sanctions, South Korean government is making clear that they would not keep the UN sanctions and would not try to violate any sanctions in the case of providing any accommodations to North Korean delegates.
And you mentioned before about a joint appearance at the opening ceremony as well as a unified women's ice hockey team. Now, what significance would this carry if it does happen?
I think symbolically it's very important because North Korean athletes are coming into the Olympic Games, and we can easily expect that the North-South Koreas have united teams together. Maybe ice hockey, women's ice hockey team would be one of the focuses that they're talking about, the uniting and having a unilateral team. But also there are some concerns in the South Korean athletes whether they have to be joining the team or not, because some of the quotas of North Korean athletes would exclude some of the athletes of South Korea to join the team. So South Korean government mentioned that they would try best not to harm or give damage to the South Korean athletes, but at the same time, IOC made it clear that the number of athletes should not be expanded. So I think that's what the dilemma is about in the South Korean government.
So no special cases would be made for the
so.
Koreas. Okay. Now, during the second round of inter-Korea talks on Pyongyang's participation in the Games on Monday, it's been agreed that North Korea will send a 140-member orchestra to perform during the Winter Olympics. The SANCTIONS band is expected to perform folk songs and pieces that call for the reunification of the two Koreas. And before we talk more about the band, let's take this time to get a look at the band's performance. So tell us more about this SANCTIONS band and what significance the band's attendance in the Olympics holds.
Well, I think the original SANCTIONS band is very small-scale band, which is like the Morambong band. I mean, their major, purpose is to propagate the North Korean regime. Most of the songs that they sing has some lyrics that support the Kim Jong-un and Kim Il-sung regime. So I think that kind of, bands are not proper to be participating in South Korea and have any, musical, things in South Korea. So I think the SANCTIONS band has been expanded a little bit. I mean, they, increased the size. So I think now they will try to call it SANCTIONS Orchestra rather than band.
Okay.
Maybe the reason why they changed the scale and the name is because they don't want to have the same reputation as they used to have. I mean, the purpose of them were, as I have mentioned, to propagate the North Korean regime. So maybe they want to remove that kind of reputation and also give a very good impression in South Korea so that they kind of increase the size and change the name, I think.
But this orchestra performing here in South Korea, this event could be a source of controversy here in South Korea, depending on, I guess, what kind of pieces or songs that they decide to perform.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're going to sing the same, play the same song that they used to play. I mean, also they have some history, to canceling their performance in Beijing. I mean, they tried to. For example, Morambong band last year, have attempted to have their performance in Beijing, but because Chinese government, focused and criticized and tell them not to play any songs that is, intending to, praise the North Korean regime and Kim Jong-un. And one of the leaders of Morambong band at the time rejected them and canceled their performance and came back to Pyongyang. So I don't think any kinds of songs that they played before would not be repeated in South Korea. Maybe the purpose would be not directly praising the regime, but rather than giving them good impression to South Korea and Olympic game participants that North Korea is a peace-loving country. They are not developing their nuclear weapons for the purpose of attacking any other countries. So that kind of purposes. They want to change their reputation from negative to positive, so that the international community would take a look at North Korea a little bit differently from the past.
And this orchestra, along with North Korean singers and performers, are going to perform in Seoul and Gangneung, but not in Pyeongchang. Why so? Well,
maybe they want to play in Seoul because Seoul is the biggest city in South Korea. If they play does any performance in South Korea, maybe the art hall, biggest art hall in Seoul, they will give Seoul citizens and entire Seoul people, in South Korean people, very good impression. Oh, they are not this different, performing band or orchestra, that kind of thing. And maybe the reason why they're playing again in Gangneung is because I don't think they can, do any performances in Pyeongchang, which is the place for the Olympics, because that's for every countries, every participant, every athlete, it's not fair to give any unique chance for the North Korean orchestra to have a chance to have a performance there. So I think Gangneung is very close to Pyeongchang, maybe very symbolic city as one of the important cities that have prepared for the Pyeongchang Olympic Games. So I think two cities, yeah, those are the reasons, I think.
All right. Now, we also have the IOC meeting coming up on Saturday, where the two Koreas will be discussing what they discussed today with the IOC in Switzerland. So what can we expect from this meeting?
Yes, today the vice minister level meeting, North-South Koreas, I think, have been discussing many issues about the Pyeongchang Olympic Games, all the logistics and accommodation issues, how to provide any support, monetary support to North Korea, so on and so forth. But this is something that has happened only between two Koreas, and those things that have been agreed between two Koreas should be finalized in IOC. So I think that's the meaning of meeting in IOC that's been finalized by and also approved by the Central Committee of Olympic Games.
And also the talks surrounding how to cover the expenses for the North Korean team would also
also that kind of things would be also discussed. And important thing is that the IOC, the international organization, is agreeing upon any agreements that have been made by North and South Koreas. And I think this is kind of important so that any agreements made by two Koreas is justified and approved by international communities. And that, I think, is making and giving any justification to be addressed and lead to any other further discussions in the further meetings between two Koreas, I think.
All right, so what impact will today's talks have on future bilateral talks between the two Koreas from here on out? Well,
once two Koreas have done talking on Olympic Games, I think this is a very good basis for any further cooperations and any further dialogue and rapprochement between two Koreas. I think from now on, maybe they can talk about any other military practical meetings which also can be focusing on the Olympic Games, how they can secure the safety issues of those athletes and representatives who are participating in the Olympic Games. But I think also same time, this meetings can also lead to any other expanded agenda, which is not only focused and limited to the Olympic Games, but other issues related to the North-South Korea relations per se.
And this could possibly open up a door of dialogue with other countries and North Korea as well, you think? All right. Well, ahead of the vice minister level meeting today, North Korea actually strongly condemned the South Korean President Moon Jae-in for his remarks on unwavering sanctions on the North's nuclear program. What can we make of this?
Yes, North Korea has condemned South Korean President Moon Jae-in's comment. He actually mentioned that the President Trump's, maximum pressure on North Korea was very helpful for the current level of North-South dialogue, based upon the Pyeongchang Olympic Games. I think a first purpose would be taming South Korea. I mean, taming South Korea so that, setting up the agenda and, going into the agreement. I think North Korea wants to lead South Korea into the outcome that North Korea wants to. And second purpose, I think, would be kind of excluding the United States from this current dialogue phase. I mean, U.S. always wants to denuclearize North Korea. That's the central focus of the U.S. policy towards North Korea. If denuclearizing North Korea fails, I think the U.S. would go back to its hardline sanction-based policy towards North Korea. So I think North Korea just want to focus on North-South dialogue, which I think North Korea wants to make a very important basis for a further and future U.S.-North Korea dialogue. And I think the hopes and the wishes that North Korea has in its dialogue with the United States is to be accepted as a nuclear state rather than denuclearizing itself.
And also decrease pressure that it's feeling from the international community in regards to its nuclear program.
I think North Korea wants to develop the current phase and use these kinds of dialogue phase into the future level of its policies to be accepted as a nuclear state and kind of remove further U.S. policies towards North Korea, which is very hardline. Also, another purpose I think would be to make any divergence and gaps between the U.S. and South Korean policy towards North Korea.
Now, North Korea, meanwhile, has reiterated that the return of a dozen citizens who entered South Korea back in 2016 is a precondition for resuming family reunions for families who are separated by the Korean War. But the South Korean government refused to return those North Korean defectors. So where do you see this going?
Well, I think this issue is very much related to the issue of reunion of separate family issues that South Korean government has proposed, which means that North Korean government is unwilling to accept the agenda of reunion issues, separate families reunion issues. I think which means that Kim Jong-un still feels insecure about his power and power consolidation. If people of North and South Korea meet together, there will be very important opportunity for North Korean people to have contact with South Korean people. A lot of information would be, delivered to the North Korean people, which would be a very important obstacle for the consolidation of its power, Kim Jong-un's power. So I don't think North Korean government wants to give any opportunity for South Korean people to have contact with North Korean people.
So do you see more chances of the reunions happening, though, after the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics?
Well, I'm not sure. If once North Korea, achieves the, nuclear power issues, maybe that's possible. But I don't think Kim Jong-un is, the same person as Kim Jong-il. Kim Jong-il before kind of accepted all the proposals by South Korea, achieved the summit meeting, Kaesong complex, things like that. Kim Jong-il's power was very much consolidated at the time, but I don't think Kim Jong-un would be willing to risk his power for the sake of any kinds of rapprochement or people contact between two Koreas. So I don't think that would be happening very soon. We have to wait until things happen and get settled down, which is like denuclearization issues and so forth.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you very much.